In this video, I'll demonstrate using the Microsoft ASP.NET 2.0 extensions for AJAX, or MS AJAX, to implement client-side network callbacks. So, network service calls that we will initiate directly from the JavaScript code in our client. To do this, I'll fire up Visual Web Developer. You can follow along with VWD, which is the free version of Visual Studio, or the full version of Visual Studio, whichever you have and prefer. So we'll say create a website. I'll select an AJAX-enabled website template, Visual Basic as the programming language. And here we have the shell of an empty application. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to have some service methods to call. So let's select a web service, and I'll just call this simple service. And I'm going to check the place code in a separate file checkbox button, which will implement code behind, which is my preferred coding model for ASP.NET. And let's just change our method here. Say hello, and just I want to show round trip arguments going back and forth between the client and the server. So let's add an argument, and because this is a web service, right, there's no static connection, and therefore because the web service runs in a different process than our application, we need to pass all parameters by value. So that's okay, and we'll just pass in a string, and then we'll echo back a static hello and the name. Alright, so now if we just really quickly, we can test our web service here. Say hello, and let's say hello to my manager Simon. There we go. There's the this is a representation of the XML that gets returned. Internet Explorer obviously is doing a little interpretation there. So our web service is working. Now let's go ahead and implement the client-side version here. Now here's our empty page. We have a script manager on the page, since all MS AJAX web pages need to have an instance and only one instance of the script manager on the page. So let's go down here, and I'm going to grab a couple of controls, but note that I'm not going to use server-side ASP.NET controls, but instead I'm going to use HTML controls. So these are just HTML artifacts, and they don't have any ASP.NET server-side code behind them. So a couple things we're going to need here. First, let's take a text box that we can use to enter the name that we want to send to our web service, and then simply a button that's going to invoke our network callback. So its name is button1, and we'll just... Okay, now let's hop into our source code. So the first thing is, we're going to write some JavaScript code that's going to access our simple service. But in order to access the simple service, our script manager is going to have to know about its existence. So I'm going to go in and change the definition of our script manager a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a services collection, and then inside that services collection, let's add a service reference. And the path to our service reference is going to be simple service .asmx. Now, a couple of important points here. The first thing is that we only need to use the name simple service here because the simple service ASMX file exists in the project that we're working in. So all we need to do is specify the file name. If we were specifying a web service that we wanted to talk to from our JavaScript code, and that web service lived either in a different project in the solution or at some different endpoint on our server, we would need to specify a resolvable path to that ASMX file. The second thing I want to point out here is that this is simply the file name. So by default, when we generate this service, notice we used code behind. By default here, the class is the same as the file name. But in your production application, that might not be the case. So the class name, so normally when we call one of these things, we use the constructs class.method. So we'd say simple service dot say hello. Now, But I don't want us to confuse the name of the class with the name of the file. They just happen to be the same by default. But it's possible that this file name might be, Joe's Demo Simple Service, and the class name could still just be Simple Service. So what we're specifying here in the service reference is simply the name of the file, so that we can resolve to it, not the type name or any other sort of qualifier to the method itself. So the next thing I need to do is I can go back over here, and I'm going to highlight the Say Hello button. I'm going to double click on it, and note that this gives us a method, the same as if we were programming against a server-side ASP.NET control, but this method is in fact a client-side JavaScript method, right? So it's so this is just going to be downloaded and run on the client. All right, so let's go ahead and call our service method. We can do that by saying return simple service, which is our class name, and say hello, which is our method name. And then remember that the say hello function that we, or the say hello service method that we wrote, expects one input parameter, which is a string, and we were going to get this string that we're going to pass to that service method from the text box on our HTML form. So we can derive that data. Remember, we can't just say name.text, because it's not an ASP.NET control. It's just a HTML artifact. But no problem. We can still get the value by going document dot get element by ID, and the name of the text box was text1, and then specifically we're interested in the value field. And that's all the parameters that our service method expects, but we're not done yet. So we're calling our service method that we defined with the name say hello, but we're not actually going to be calling that directly. What we're going to be calling here instead, when we invoke simple service.sayHello, what we're actually going to be calling under the covers is a proxy to our service method. And the reason that we want to do that is we want these calls to be asynchronous. So we don't want to block on our call, meaning the user clicks on the button and then has to sit there and wait. The browser is sort of frozen until an answer comes back. That would defeat a lot of the purpose of AJAX-style programming. What we want to do instead is we want to let the user click on the button, have the JavaScript fire off that call back to our service method, and then let the user go about their business doing other things in the user interface. And then when the server answers, then our JavaScript code can catch the answer from the server and do whatever processing with it we want. So luckily, Microsoft AJAX provides all that plumbing for us without us having to write a bunch of code. We just have to make one little change. So we need to go back into our simple service VB file here, and notice that this is a web service because when we declare the simple service class, we inherit from system.web.services.webService, and say hello is a web method because we decorate it with the web method attribute. But we also need to tell the runtime that we want the web methods in this class to be exposed as being callable from JavaScript. Right? So we want the runtime to generate that script callable proxy. So in order to do that, we're just going to add this one more attribute. These are not part of what gets installed with Microsoft AJAX. They're just my snippets, so that you don't have to watch me fumble with the keyboard here. So you'll have to type this in by yourself. System.web.script.services.script-service, and that's all we need to provide so that the ASP.NET AJAX extensions runtime will know that we're going to call the web methods that are in the simple service class from client-side JavaScript. Now we can go over and we can finish writing the call to our say hello web method. So there are a few more arguments now that we're actually calling the web method proxy as opposed to calling the web method directly. The first is we need to specify a JavaScript function that will be called when that asynchronous call completes. So we'll say onComplete. The other thing is that since all of this is web technology and it runs on top of HTTP, and HTTP is an innately stateless protocol, there's a possibility that we'll send that call to the server and the server won't answer. Maybe it's not there anymore. So we also need to specify a JavaScript function to be called in the event that we make that service call and the call times out. We don't get an answer in the required period of time. And there's a timeout default, a certain number of seconds that are default, although you can explicitly set that that timeout value in your application. And then lastly, we need to specify a JavaScript function to specify what we want to do if there's an error. And remember that calling this web method asynchronously through the proxy, on timeout and on error are different things. On timeout means I asked a question of the web server and I didn't get a response. On error means I asked a question of the web server and I got a response, but the response was, sorry, I had a problem, I can't answer your question. And then we can hop out of our onClick method here. Now we just need to define the JavaScript functions for onComplete, onError, and onTimeout. So function onComplete, and the service proxy will return whatever the return values from the web service were into our JavaScript functions. And now let's just use the magic of cut and paste for the other two. Alright, so little note about programming a JavaScript here. A couple things to notice. The first thing is that there's no IntelliSense error here. JavaScript, the scripting language here, is perfectly happy to let me define multiple versions of the same function name. So also a reminder about the case sensitivity. JavaScript is case sensitive, so we have coming in the next version of Visual Studio, it's codenamed Orcus, a whole collection of enhancements that will help us web developers that are doing AJAX-style programming and writing a lot of client-side JavaScript. So in addition to a really fantastic new designer that's plugged into to Visual Studio Orcus, we'll get things like complete IntelliSense for both JavaScript and all of the Microsoft AJAX stuff, and a rich debugging experience that will let us debug back and forth between the JavaScript code running in the browser and the server-side code that's running in ASP.NET. So the Orcus version will have lots of great enhancements for those of us that are doing this kind of work. So let's change this to on timeout and on error. And if there's an error, you might want to do some error processing. Maybe you want to try the call again. Maybe you want to, or maybe you just want to store some content in your JavaScript that you can display when there's an error. So maybe you can have some sort of generic content. Depends on, again, the semantics of your application. In our case, we're just going to pop up an alert that says right, so we'll just pop up that error, and then for timeout, we'll do the same thing. We'll say, and then here in onComplete, this is where you would take the content that get returned from the service method and put it in your web page someplace. So just to test our application, in our case, we're just going to pop up. We're going to pop up whatever got sent back. But this is a place. Remember that what's coming across back from that service method, that can be anything that can be serializable. So it can be text, it can be XML that you can enumerate in your JavaScript code. I recently did a Live from Redmond webcast where I demonstrated implementing the predictive fetch pattern for AJAX programming, and I had a service method that was returning just a truckload of HTML, so pre-configured markup, and then all I had to do was take the results from that call, which was a bunch of HTML, and pop it into an existing div on the page, and it was as easy as that. So I didn't have to do any client-side processing with what I got back. I just expected HTML to be sent back from the server, and I could put that in a div. So you can get really creative about what you do in terms of what you generate on the server and what's being sent back to the client. So in this case, let's just go ahead and run our sample application. Let's say hello to my manager. Awesome. And so there you have it. And we've just implemented network callbacks using Microsoft ASP.NET extensions for AJAX, and this means that we're getting data from the server, but we're doing it in extremely efficient fashion. So unlike using the update panel, we are making a callback to the server, but we're doing it without executing the full page lifecycle back on the server and without passing all of the forms data back to the server. So not only none of the hidden forms, or if there were other form fields on this page, none of the view state goes back. So this is a highly efficient mechanism for carrying on this conversation between our client and our server. And that's it. That's all it takes to get started doing direct network callbacks from your AJAX code, writing the JavaScript that runs in the browser.